What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of TechInterview.guide, the website. And tonight, I'm actually going to do a handful more Q&A that I've had come in from different sources, from Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on. And so I want to address some of those. Again, appreciate everybody's patience as I'm recovering from this shoulder surgery. I'm almost at a point. I got like another week and a half, and then I can get rid of this sling. So I'm looking forward to that. My physical therapist is helping me kind of rearrange my workstation here so I can actually like lean on the desk a little bit more and get some work done. So I'm starting to be a little more productive at work, which is great. Feel a lot of guilt over like starting a job and then needing surgery and like not being as productive as I want to be, and worrying that I'm not as productive as they want me to be. But I appreciate their patience, but also your patience, because I know that you're hanging in on the stream and trying to learn from me and my experience, my perspectives, and the people that I have on the stream with me to kind of hear from their perspectives on things, all about tech interviews and preparation and things to do for job hunt and stuff like that. And so I appreciate that everybody's still hanging in there. So yeah, so we're going to jump in. I got maybe a dozen or so questions I'm going to get through tonight, and then we'll wrap up from there. Haven't got a plan for this Thursday yet. I do want to have somebody on the stream, maybe get a live resume review in. I have had a couple of resume reviews, so I appreciate those coming in. If you want to check out the live chat here, we do a bang resume. So for a free resume review, you can check out techinterview.guide/streaming. Scroll down on that page and you'll see a form to submit a resume for review. It'll tell you about how to anonymize it and so on, so that when I have it on the stream, it doesn't have like your real name and phone number and stuff like that. So one detail that we missed last week when I had Lee on the show, we were doing a resume review for somebody, and we're kind of panning around the screen a little bit, and I was a little bit worried because I saw like a phone number on there. I'm like, oh no, they anonymized everything else. They anonymized their name, they anonymized all the GitHub links, but they left a phone number on there, and I was like feeling super guilty about it. Turns out it was Tommy Two-Tone, 8675309 as the phone number. Totally missed the detail, and I'm old enough that I should have caught that. But anyway, hope everybody's doing well, and yeah, appreciate you all hanging in there. All right, so we're going to jump into some questions. The other thing I'd love to hear from folks, I've done a couple of these sessions now where I just blitz through a whole bunch of questions. I'll take questions from chat too, so if you're hanging out in chat, feel free to drop questions in there or just chat and say hello. But if you've got questions, definitely drop those in there. But the thing that I want to find out from all of you is whether it would be helpful for me to carve these longer videos into shorter videos where I address just that one question at a time and do like a bunch of short videos instead. It'll feel a little weird on the stream to say like, okay, well, I'm going to pause now and then like, all right, welcome to the stream. I've got this question. And then the next question I get to is like, all right, welcome to the stream. Here's the question. Like, I don't want to have to repeat that over and over on the live stream. So I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of do a good sort of break in between the questions, whether it's just several seconds of silence or something like that, and then maybe record like an intro and outro video or something like that to kind of prepend and append on those and do like a whole bunch of short videos. The benefit to doing that is I could get them out on like Instagram or TikTok or like other platforms like that to help people out. But I don't know too much about like attention span on those platforms. And I know some of the answers that I get into get a little lengthy. So I know that for TikTok, for example, it needs to be like 30 seconds or less or something if you're really going to grab people's attention. And Instagram also needs to be fairly short as well. So if any of you have information about that sort of thing, I would love to hear from you. So feel free to drop a comment, drop it in chat, or if you're watching this on YouTube later on, leave me a comment on YouTube. Or if you're, coming here through like a link from LinkedIn or Twitter that I'm going to post later when I get the video online, feel free to reply to that and let me know what you think. If you'd prefer me to do like a bunch of short videos where I address each question individually, or just have these longer form videos, and then I can, in the description on YouTube, I can say like, this is the question, here's the timestamp of like how to jump ahead, so that people can get to the content that they want. So yeah, so I think we'll jump into the questions. We'll go from there. So a recurring question that I get on the stream, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on other platforms is what are some questions that I can ask at the end of the interview? Or, do you have any questions for me? Like, what should I ask? And I want to do a whole session just on that. I know I said that last time. I said that, the last time I did one of these long videos. I do want to get around, and I've been preparing some content for that. I do want to get around to just addressing that on a stream in and of itself. So I want to have a whole bunch of people, I preferably want to have 2. I'm trying to figure out whether I can stream well enough, if I can stream 3 people and get a whole bunch of folks on here where we can all talk about our experiences about like, what are some good questions that we've been asked? Or, for interviews that we've been on, what are good questions that we've asked? There are a lot of resources out there that you can find about what kinds of questions to ask. I've seen websites where you can sort of dial in, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but there's a good website where you can sort of click on like, these are the cultural things that are important to me, and it'll actually give you a bunch of questions that you can ask during the interview. I'll try to find that, and I'll post it in the YouTube description later on if I can find it. But there's a whole website for that. There's a lot of resources out there for like what kinds of questions to ask. But from an interviewer's perspective, I'd like to go over some of those questions and talk about why those would be meaningful to ask from an interview prep point of view. So I want to do a whole session just on that. So stay tuned on the channel, on the stream. Feel free to like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff to get notified when I do post that video. I'm not very good at marketing myself, as you know, but yeah, I will get around to posting that at some point. I'd like to get that by the middle of September, if possible. All right, a question that we got: how do you answer "What was your last salary?" without sounding rude in a job interview? I've answered similar questions to this on other streams, and the consensus that we come to is like, you should never give them a number first. You should always find out from them what they're willing to pay for the role before explaining how much money you want for the role. Things that I've explained in the past is you should always give a range of numbers. You should never give just a single number and say, I want to make this many dollars. You can also like come up with a whole compensation package if you want and say, this is my ideal sort of comp package with salary and benefits and stock options and things like that. But kind of what we say in the industry is like, the first person to kind of say a number is the person that's going to lose. But, I think that that's a little bit us or them sort of mentality. And I think we need to be careful about that. Like there's a mutual respect, I think, that has to happen. And so while I do agree that we should kind of keep it under wraps, and we should probably, reserve some of that, like you should always try to find out from them, like, hey, what range are you offering for this role? Like, can you talk about that? Just, I don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste my time. But like, can you give me a little more context for the conversation? Like, what are you willing to pay? And then I'd be willing to kind of share my input from there. I think that kind of thing is kind of a smarter approach. It can be hard sometimes to defer because some companies, they kind of take the same mindset of like, we don't want to tell you the number first, otherwise we're going to lose. We want you to tell us your number first so that we can sort of beat that or figure out how to like work around that number, those kinds of things, which all sounds a little weird. It's this big, weird sort of dance that has to happen between companies and candidates, but it doesn't have to happen. That's the thing, is like, if there's a good mutual respect, then it's not a dance. It's not a gimmick. Like, just be honest, be open, and say, this is what we're willing to offer for the role. What's your expectation? Like, is that even within your expectation? In Colorado, though, the nice thing here in Colorado where I live, any job post from a company that's in Colorado, they have to explain the salary expectation as part of that post. So that's kind of a nice thing. And then you can kind of negotiate from there. But you have to know those numbers to begin with. So if you check out the last stream I did around compensation packages and negotiations, I do kind of go into a little more explanation on that. As far as answering the question, like, how do you answer what that last salary was without sounding rude? The first thing I'll mention is, in some states, it's actually illegal for them to ask you that. In the states where it's not illegal, you can kind of defer the question by saying like, oh, I've signed non-disclosure agreements and I've agreed that I wouldn't talk about it. And most companies know that that's just a bunch of bullcrap, that you're not actually signing a non-disclosure where you're not allowed to talk about your compensation. They know that you're just kind of deferring them at that point. So just be honest and just say, my previous salary history doesn't define, the amount of money that I'll be making at this next role. This is my expectation. We've already discussed that. And so my previous salary history shouldn't play into that. I think that you can literally use terminology like that without coming across rude, and just say like, this is like a new avenue for me, or this is the new sort of skill that I want to get into, or this is the new direction I'm taking my career, and this is my expectation. My previous roles weren't going in that direction, or maybe they were. So I would say if the new role that you're getting into is a different kind of role, then you can use deferring language around, my previous salary shouldn't come into play because this is a new direction. And so because it's a new direction, this is my expectation for heading in that new direction. If it's similar work that you've already done, then again, you can kind of defer and say, my previous salary history, doesn't really matter. This is the role, these are the responsibilities I'm willing to take on, and this is the expectation that I have. And so just hold your ground on that. And I would say you don't have to be rude about it. There are ways that you can sort of phrase that without coming across rude, just by deferring the answer a little bit, because it's not important. Like, companies really don't need to know how much money you made at a previous job. They have a set expectation of what they're willing to pay for the role that you've applied to. Just ask them what that is. Once you know that range, then you can negotiate from there. But your previous salary history should never come into play on that. The next question we have, what are some reasons a software architect would decide to go for some flavor of monolithic architecture for a system instead of a microservice architecture? It was a good question. A couple of years ago, well, several years ago, everybody was building big monolith apps. That's kind of how we did our development until probably midway between 2000 and 2010. And then somewhere towards 2010, everybody started jumping on the microservice bandwagon and like breaking everything into small, tiny pieces. There are pros and cons to that. The main benefit to going to a microservice architecture is that you can scale any portion of it that you need. And so if there's one portion of the application that's busier than others, you can scale just that part, either horizontally or vertically. When it comes to microservice architecture, though, if you need more capacity, you have to scale the entire application, and that can be harder to do depending on the application that you've built. I think that there's so many different ways of building an application these days. You've got some sort of front-end technology, maybe a back-end API of some kind, or the back-end is like, doing all the HTML and all the front-end and sending that back to the browser or whatever mobile device in some format to interpret and display. So I guess to really answer this question, like, what are some reasons that you would go for, like, you would specifically move towards a monolith app? As a senior dev in the industry, I would say I would probably reach for a monolith app as part of like a proof of concept. Like, I want to, I've got this project in mind. I'm just going to like throw together this monolith app just to see, whether this project sort of has teeth, as we would say. Is this going to catch on? Is this going to, attract some users? Is that, a reasonable thing? Because I can put together a monolith app with a database and do a little bit of front end just to kind of get a sense of, would people even use this kind of thing? If so, then I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'll plan it out, maybe in microservice architecture, depending on why I would want or need a microservice sort of architecture scheme for that. Like, is there a reason why I'm moving towards a microservice architecture? So, I already talked about how, like, between 2005, 2010, we saw a lot of people migrate to microservices, and that's still pretty common, but it can be challenging to have a microservice only kind of application, because now you've got all these pieces and they're all scattered all over the place. And it can be much harder to sort of get all these pieces up and running to know that your application's actually working. You end up doing, either a lot of Docker containers, or you're spinning up all these other services on all these different port numbers on your development machine. And then, making sure that, I forgot to spin up this one thing, and so none of it works. And how do you start everything up so that you can test it properly. And that's the other benefit to a monolith app, is you've generally got like one application, you spin that up and you're good to go, and everything, you know, you can run your tests or do user-based testing where you're kind of clicking around your own application. But when it comes to a production level app, there can be a lot more benefits doing smaller sorts of applications. You can deploy them each individually. So if you need to make an improvement or a security fix or a bug fix, you don't have to deploy everything in your system, or you don't have to take the entire system offline just to upgrade part of it. Although it depends on your microservice architecture too. If you've got a really key component that needs upgrading, it's going to take everything offline anyway. And so I would say I can't really think of a good single strong use case where you would want to build a monolith app instead of a microservice app for like a long-term production ready kind of thing. You could, but scalability is going to be an issue. And that's why we came up with kind of the microservice and the service-oriented architecture design pattern of how do we break this into smaller parts so that we can scale only the bottleneck parts without having to scale the entire thing. So I would say for proof of concept, it would be a good idea. But then if you're going to scale it and put it in production for real, then you would probably not do a monolith app. Next question on the list we had, should you disclose to potential employers during the application or interview process that you're planning to go to graduate school in the next few years? Nope, it's none of their business. I think a lot of HR people, they're going to ask like, you know, where do you see yourself in a couple of years? Or, you know, what do you want to be doing a couple of years from now? That one's always really hard to tell because none of us are, you know, can tell the future. None of us have like the little crystal ball kind of thing. We can't really tell where we're going to be from a technology point of view or a workplace point of view. It can be really tricky. And so if you're planning on going to grad school, I would ask several questions. Hey, Patty666420 just subscribed. Thanks for subscribing. Appreciate that. I think you're my first subscriber, so I appreciate that very much. Thank you. If you're planning on going to grad school, I would ask yourself why. There have actually been some studies done in like computer science areas of things where they say like, you know, if you got a bachelor's in some other like undergrad, should you get a master's in computer science? Like, would that help? I would say if your undergrad is anything other than computer science, getting a master's in computer science can definitely help your career. If you have a bachelor's degree in computer science, getting a master's degree really doesn't help much. In fact, it can actually harm your job hunt because a lot of people are going to look at your resume and go, oh, you've got a master's degree, but no, you know, real professional experience necessarily. Some do, most don't. And so here you are coming out of school with a master's degree in computer science where you already had the undergrad degree in computer science. And so they're going to look at that and go, oh, with a master's degree, you're going to expect more money, more compensation. But at the end of the day, you're still an entry-level dev. And so does it warrant that? Well, it depends on what your master's was all about. Like, did you do a thesis? Was it like a white paper research kind of thesis, or was it a project-based thesis? It'll depend a little bit on what your master's was about. But again, I think if you're doing a master's degree over top of some other background, like let's say you've got a bachelor's or some other degree in, you know, accounting or finance or business or like something that's not tech adjacent, and you're transitioning into a tech career. Like, let's say you had some other career. I'm just pulling things out of the air. Like, let's say you were in accounting and bookkeeping and you decided to go to a boot camp, and now you're thinking, you know, maybe I should go back and get that master's degree in computer science. That could be a good path for you. I think that could be a good path, but you should not tell your employer that. What you could do is you could ask like, hey, if I continue to take additional classes to improve my knowledge and improve my training, is there any kind of tuition reimbursement? You can ask about that during the interview. I would leave it at that. I wouldn't go any farther than that and say, you know, I'm thinking about taking some time off in a little while and like doing graduate school. I think that might worry them a little bit because they're going to worry, like, what is that timeline really? Like, how much work are we going to get out of you before you decide to leave and go pursue graduate school? Is graduate school something you could do part-time? I think that would be another good question to ask yourself. Are you willing to do it on a part-time basis, or do you want to quit your job and go do graduate school full-time? These are all pretty major considerations and would have an impact on your employment, obviously. So I think you need to consider those kinds of questions, but I would not bring that up, especially during an application or interview process, because I think that they could bias against you. So at best, I would say ask them if there's like tuition reimbursement. Just say, I'm thinking about taking some additional classes. I'm really interested in like, approaching this kind of thing. I'm just thinking about additional classes. Don't mention that they're master's level classes or anything like that. Just say, I'm thinking about taking some classes. Do you have a tuition reimbursement program? Medium to large size companies will probably have some kind of program like that. Startups and smaller companies, they might, but probably not. They probably won't have the budget or the capacity for that. But either way, no, I wouldn't mention it as part of the application or interview process. Now, if it's a requirement for the job, like you must have a master's degree in such and such, and you don't have that master's degree, I think you could still apply for the job, and you could say like, I'm thinking about, I saw that this was a requirement for the job, and so I'm considering it. If there is a tuition reimbursement program, I'm happy to work towards that. You could bring that up because now you're selling that as part of why they should hire you. But if it's not a requirement of the job, I wouldn't bring it up at all. I don't think you should bring it up. All right, next question on the list. What interview questions would you ask to cover as many aspects as possible? So when I first got this question, I thought of it as two different things. One from an interviewer's perspective and one as a candidate's perspective. And again, from a candidate's perspective, it's that whole like, what questions should I ask during the interview? And I'm going to do a whole thing on that. From an interviewer's perspective, I was actually recently asked, builtin.com was doing a blog article about like, what questions do you like to ask that give you as much data as possible about the candidate? And so I wrote up some stuff and I sent it to them, and they did a follow-up, and I'm not sure when that article is coming out. But one of the things that I was talking internally with our hiring team at Stream was we do need to be careful asking questions that are so complex of the candidate that they start to lose context of the question and why we're asking that kind of question, or trying to figure out what we're trying to ask them. I think that asking simpler questions, so asking simpler questions and more of them, is a better result for an interview than asking a single question that's got like 15 parts. And as a candidate, you've got to try to remember all those parts and constantly asking like, what else was there in that question? Like, what else can I tell you? Or was that enough context? That makes it feel more like an interview and less like a conversation. And so I think anything that can keep the interview feeling more conversational is better. And so I would generally advise, whether you're an interviewer or a candidate, any questions that you ask should be simple, to the point, have, just a nice, short, concise answer, or be able to be answered in a short, concise way without going into tons and tons of detail. If you're asking questions like, do you have any questions for me? And you're the candidate asking me questions, we probably only have a couple of minutes to get through those. I'm probably only going to get to answer like 2 or 3 of your questions. And so if you come armed with like 20 questions that you want to ask, the first question I would probably ask would be something like, hey, I've got a whole list of things here. How much time have we got to address some of these? And can I ask some of these in a follow-up interview of some kind? They'll probably be okay with that. But as far as like, what kinds of questions do I ask to get a lot of information out of a candidate? One of my favorites was like, tell me about a time that you wrote some code and you got some pushback on it because you're trying to balance the difference between complexity and readability in code. So there's a couple of aspects in there, tell me about a time. So I'm asking for a scenario kind of thing. And so you definitely want to tell a story about it. But I'm asking about a time that you wrote some code, you did like a pull request or something. And I want to know about a scenario where someone else that was doing a code review kind of pushed back on your code, either because it was highly optimized and unreadable, or you changed a bunch of code that was optimized and you were changing it to become readable, because the two are very different. In a lot of times, it's hard to write very readable code that is also highly optimized, in my experience. That question gives me a lot of information about you as a developer, about how you build your code, how you collaborate, how you have that communication with others, how you work on a team, what sort of team conversations do you have, how you do, pull requests and so on. And so that one gives me a lot of information. But again, I try to avoid questions that are too complex where you've got to give me like a 10-minute story. Like I just want like a 2 or 3 minute story. I don't want like a 10-minute story every time I ask a question, because I've got a lot of questions to get through too. The next one on the list, how important is the script in a job interview? This could be multiple different things, and unfortunately I didn't get a lot of context with this one. Some interviews follow a very strict, like, we must ask everybody the following 10 questions. And I think when I had Lee on the stream last week, he mentioned something like that. Like he literally had to ask every candidate, the same 10 questions. Or I was on a call with someone and they were talking, it was a coffee call that I was doing with someone else. And they were talking about how in order to avoid bias and avoid, preferential treatment towards any particular candidate, they literally had to ask every candidate the exact same questions, and there was zero deviation from that list of questions. To that company, that was very important to them. I've worked at companies like that when I worked freelance in California. One of my freelance jobs was working for an LA County government office. It was the LA County Office of Education. And they were trying to hire someone to sort of manage the team. And they had a very strict set of questions that they had to ask. And it was only those questions. They couldn't deviate and say like, oh, tell me a little bit more about that answer. And sort of like steering the conversation in a different direction. They couldn't do that because they had a very strict set of questions they had to ask. It's a government job. And so they had to be absolutely, fair to all candidates, and there was no leeway at all for a conversation. So it depends on the company. It depends on who they are. It depends on, what kinds of things that are important to them as far as like, do they follow a script of questions? Me personally, I like to ask a question, and then based on your answer, I might ask a follow-up question or like take the conversation in a particular direction. Eventually, I'm going to come back to my list of questions, but I do like to ask follow-up questions and so on. Coding more in chat. Hello, friends. Hello to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope your weekend has been awesome. Hope that you're prepped for a good week at the job. How's that job going, by the way? Have you started yet? I think you started. I think you got that job like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I missed the last couple of streams with Jonan, so I'm not sure where you're at with that job, but I hope you're doing well. So yeah, tell me in chat all about this job. I'm curious how it's going for you, or we can chat offline another time. All right, next one in the list. How can I prepare for an interview for a better job? Well, that's why I'm here. This is what my whole stream is about. How do you prepare for an interview? There are a lot of things to kind of cover, like what is that new job going to be? How is it going to stretch you? And then what do you need to prepare to get into that kind of job? Is this a brand new job? Like, is this the first job in this kind of avenue that you're going for? Or is this like just more of the same? And so if it's a better job, I guess quantify better for me. What does better mean? Is it like better pay, better responsibility, better work-life balance, better commute? What is better? And so I think what makes a job better for one person may not be better for another person. So without a little more context, it's a little tricky to answer this. But this is my whole reason for doing this live stream, honestly, is like how to help you get better at these jobs. Spontaneous Silver subscribed. Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate that. 2 subscribers in one night. You're my first 2 subscribers. That's been great. Very surprising. I don't do this to make money at all. So feel free not to subscribe. Not that I'm discouraging you from being a part of this, but I'm really not doing this for the money at all. I just love helping people. Those that hang out on my stream, those that know me professionally and personally know that I just love to give back. But I appreciate the subscriptions. Thinking about doing like stickers or something like that. So that anybody that subscribes, I'll like mail you a sticker or something. I don't know. We'll figure something out there. So yeah, as far as like preparing for that job, again, that's my whole reason for being here. So the preparation is going to be based on what the job is, what sorts of questions you need to be ready to answer, what sorts of questions you should be ready to ask. That's my whole reason for being here. So check out some of the other streams, some of the other videos. I've got the whole backlog of videos on YouTube. I think Twitch, because I'm a Prime subscriber on Amazon, Twitch keeps my videos around for 60 days. After that, they're going to start to drop off. And we're getting really close to that 60 days. Actually, I started early July. So early September is going to start hitting that 60-day mark to where my videos are going to start dropping off of Twitch. So if you're watching this now, you're going to have to go check out my YouTube channel. And it's just youtube.com/c/Ian Douglas is my YouTube channel, or I think you can do bang YouTube in chat. Let's see, bang YouTube, I think. Yeah, there we go. So all my previous videos are youtube.com/c/Ian Douglas. I am thinking about doing a rebrand at some point, maybe towards the end of the year, where I actually want to do everything under the Tech Interview Guide kind of name. I've got some fancy plans for this background behind me over here and stuff like that. But I gotta get the shoulder all taken care of first before I can do much else. But yeah, tech interview preparation, that's why I'm here. It's why I exist. Definitely want to help people out on that. So yeah, keep asking questions. That's another good way to prepare for a job. Keep asking me questions so I can share that knowledge with you. Coding More says the job's been good, still in training. Yeah, training is huge and onboarding is huge. We're starting to see it stream that the onboarding process is really critical. And so this past week, I was actually evaluating a whole bunch of just onboarding platforms for how do we get people up to speed on the job? How do we teach you the vernacular and all the lingo of, oh, when we say this term, we mean, this dashboard, product or this customer facing tool or something like that. 4 weeks of onboarding where you are, that's a lot. But that's great. I mean, the more time you can spend on onboarding, the better, especially if the company's willing to invest that kind of time in you. That's awesome. So 4 weeks of onboarding is incredible. Good job. Document the crap out of everything you can. Write out lots and lots of notes, lots and lots of diagrams, and then have other people check them for accuracy. Don't just document it and keep it to yourself. Share it with other people. Document it, share it with them, get them to help you with the accuracy of it. And then see if you can put that in some kind of digital format for the next people that are onboarding. That can definitely help. I helped someone via Turing do that sort of thing at their job, and it blew their manager away. It just completely shocked them. They walked in and they're like, hey, here's all my notes that I've written up while I was onboarding, because they were hiring somebody new. And this person said hey, here's all the stuff that I've been compiling. Let's give this to the next person coming on board so that they can get up to speed even faster. And the boss was like, here's your raise. It was just incredible. It totally surprised them that this person took that initiative to do that. But I tell everybody, when you get into a new job, especially with deep code base, like you mentioned in chat, complicated tools, you got to document this stuff. You got to understand it, all the ins and outs. You need to practice it, not just read it. So yeah, great. I love that you're taking time to draw this stuff out. So good job. Alrighty, let's see. Next question on the list. After job applications close, how long should you wait to hear if you have an interview? That one can be a little bit tricky, especially in the tech industry. Sometimes job postings don't get taken down right away. Sometimes they'll stay up and they'll keep taking candidates for the role. Sometimes they'll close it, as soon as they get some quantity of applicants, they'll just close it right away so they don't get absolutely flooded and inundated with resumes and applications and so on. Because there is a practical limit to how many of those they can get through in order to hire. I think Lee shared a stat, or someone else shared a stat on this coffee call that I was on last week, where they were saying on average it costs about $10,000 to hire somebody, which is pretty accurate. I've heard it can be anywhere between 10 and 20,000, depending on the number of hours that they spend kind of going through the application process and all the time of the HR department and managers and engineers taking time to interview people and doing follow-ups and doing background checks and all the literal time that it takes and the cost involved of all those things, that it can cost upwards to $10,000 to $20,000 to interview somebody and hire somebody. But don't use that as a thing to feel guilty about, oh, I shouldn't apply for that job then because I'm not worth that. Yes, you are. Apply for that job. You're worth that money. it's their expense, not your expense. You're not costing them that money. That's their cost of doing business. Apply for the job anyway. So the question is, after job applications close, how long should you wait to hear if you have an interview? It depends on the job. It depends on the company and the size of the company. It can vary quite a lot. If they have hundreds and hundreds of people that apply, it may take them some time to go through, compile, kind of the first list of 50 people or 100 people, and then it takes time to call all those people, wait for phone calls back, have those initial interviews. So unfortunately, it can take some time. If they post a brand new job, they're going to get resumes probably within the first couple of hours of posting that job. They're probably getting applications. Does that mean they start calling people right away? Not necessarily. Some companies will wait a period of time because they want to make sure that they've got like a good mix of people that they can sort of draw from. Some companies are like, you know what, we're in a hurry. So like the first 5 people that apply, we're just going to call them. Some companies will post the job anyway, even though they've got like an internal referral or something like that. Some companies have to post a job publicly. So again, like going back to the LA County Office of Education that I worked at in California, just as one example, they had to post everything publicly. Even if internally somebody was already going to get promoted into that role, they still had to post it publicly. They still had to interview people because that was a public office position. They had to post it. And so there are different things around that. So there's no hard and fast rule about how long you should wait to hear whether you get an interview. Sometimes you'll put in an application, and some of you watching this stream, you'd be like, yeah, I applied for a ton of jobs and I didn't get a single phone call, and it's been months. Sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes you'll apply and you'll get a phone call within 24 hours. So it really depends on when they start looking at your applications and how well you're sort of standing out as a candidate. And we've talked about that a bunch on the stream. We're going to keep talking about that kind of thing on the stream. And so it is an important topic to talk about, and we'll definitely talk about it lots and lots on the stream of like, how do you stand out, for sure. Someone says, what a colossal waste of time. I don't really see it as a waste of time. I think because every company is a little bit different, it can be really tricky to kind of gauge how you're applying for those jobs, how many people are applying for those jobs, who's applying for those jobs, what kind of role is it, things like that. There are a lot of things to factor in and consider. So, sitting, waiting for the phone call. Yeah, that's a huge waste of time for sure. And that would be a huge piece of advice I would give to anybody watching this stream. If you apply for a job, don't sit by the phone and wait for them to call. Keep applying to other jobs. Keep interviewing at other jobs. Don't ever sit and wait for one job to call you or not call you and then move on to the next company and apply there. You should always be networking, always be applying, always putting yourself out there. The job hunt is not a it's not a fast process. Generally, it's going to be a slow process, especially in tech, especially with a lot of jobs being remote. Companies are being a lot more careful about who they hire. They want to make sure they get the right fit. They want to make sure they get the right person, that it's someone that can do the job that they need. So yeah, don't ever sit by the phone and wait for them to call. Now, even saying the phrase "sit by the phone and wait," we don't literally like sit at home and wait for a landline to ring anymore. We've pretty much all got mobile phones at this point. And so you're not really sitting around waiting for someone to call. You're still going to be out in mobile and doing other things, but what I mean by that is like, don't sit and wait and say, well, I'm going to apply for this job, and if I don't hear in 30 days, then I'm going to go apply for the next job. No, you should be applying to multiple jobs all the time. Until you get a job offer that you're signing, you should continue applying for jobs. You should continue interviewing for jobs. It's easier to close down an interview process than to like ramp everything all back up again and go, well, that job didn't pan out. It's time to move on to plan B. Like, you should have like 15 plans all running at the same time. And it can be a lot to juggle. And I understand that statement is going to feel overwhelming for some watching this. I get that. And I'm not suggesting that everybody must be applying to 15 jobs at a time. That's not what I'm saying. That's a bit of an exaggeration. You should apply for as many jobs as you can manage. If you can apply for 2 jobs a day or 2 jobs a week, and that's all you can manage, then that's all you can manage. That's fine. There's no expectation on you from me or anybody else how many jobs you should be applying to. but I would highly suggest don't apply to one job and then wait to hear a no before applying for the next job. You should always be applying to multiple jobs, because it's a lot easier to call a company and say, hey, I appreciate your time. I know we had an interview lined up for next week. I've actually had a job offer. I've signed it, so I don't need to do that interview anymore. Thanks for your time. It's far easier to do that than to kind of, like I say, spin everything back up again. Spontaneous Silver says in chat, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It took me 300 applications to get the first job. 300's a lot, but yeah, it can be like that in tech, depending on the time of year when you're applying. Historically in the past, like towards the end of the year had been a little bit of a quieter hiring time, because it's kind of getting into the holiday season. Some companies would wait until January, February when their budgets would get refreshed. But I think with pandemic and everything else, I think a lot of companies just kind of got to a point where they're like, you know what, we got work to do. Like, we're just going to hire. When I worked at Turing, the last couple of Q4s were actually some of the busiest quarter fours that we saw as far as students getting jobs. Because a lot of companies, like especially Q4 of 2020, companies are like, all right, we're remote, but we still got to hire. So we'll figure it out. And they were, hiring like mad. And same thing with Q4 2019, if I recall. I think we had like another record Q4. So I think the myth of excuse me, applying later in the year is a bad thing, is not really as applicable anymore as it has been in the past. That said, like, I'm not trying to downplay Spontaneous Silver at all, saying they had to apply to 300 jobs. That can absolutely be legit. I've heard of people doing hundreds and hundreds in order to get a single phone call. It can be tricky. It can be a lot, and it can feel very deflating as a human to put yourself out there and not get any contact, not get any phone calls, not get any interviews. And so it really comes down to like, why does it take us 300 applications? I think that's a good question. Why does it take so many applications to even get a single phone call back from a company? I don't have a good answer for you. I wish that our tech industry was better about hiring. That's one of the things that I'm trying to really improve at Stream with the role that I have with onboarding and kind of taking like an education role within the company of, let's just go find smart people who are good problem solvers, and we'll train them on whatever skills they don't have. So we don't have to wait and wait through like hundreds of applications for a job before we find the one person who has the right mix of skills, so that we can go interview them and find out that no, they've actually never worked on a team before, so they're not going to work out after all. So now we got to keep waiting for another good candidate to come in. It's like, you know what, let's just find people that are good at working on teams, that are good problem solvers, and let me worry about hiring them up or training them up on the tech stack that we need, or whatever team they're going to be on. Like, here's the content that they need to know. And so that's kind of the role that I'm taking on at Stream, which is a lot of fun. It's also pretty overwhelming, mixing in like all the other onboarding and stuff that we want to do. But it's a really, really great challenge for sure. Luckily, it only takes one company to give you a chance. That's true, but it can be a long journey to find that one company for sure. But yeah, once you get that first job, all the other jobs are way easier. It's the first job that's the hardest one. And I actually was on a call with someone else. I forget where it was. I was like watching someone else on a Zoom call. I know what it was. It was on Jonan's stream. I was watching one night, and someone who was just saying in chat, like, oh yeah, I lied on my resume and said that I had like 2 or 3 years experience at some other job. And that got me that next job. And then I just changed my resume, and then that became my first job. I'm like, that's dangerous though. Like, how do you just consistently lie during an interview knowing that you're misleading them? Because that's a fireable offense. Like, I would dismiss you the moment I found out. Like, you would just be out. Like, I wouldn't trust you to even like try to recover from that scenario. I would literally walk you to the door, and like, you'd be done that day. So it's a dangerous thing to do. I do not recommend that whatsoever. But once you do get that first job, it is much, much easier to get the second job for sure. All right, well, I got 4 questions left here. So we're going to kind of go through those. If you got other questions in chat, feel free to drop things in there as well. What do you say in response to your interview? Why should we hire you? That instantly amazed them and got you the job. I don't think I've ever had like an interview start with like, why should we hire you, and me give them some kind of answer and then go like, all right, we're done hiring, this is the person we're gonna hire. I don't know that it was ever that easy. I have had interviews where I'm nervous, they're nervous, and I use humor as a deflection mechanism. And so I'll like bring a moment of levity in there just to show like, hey, I'm human, but I've got a good sense of humor. The one that stands out to me the most offhand was a startup in Santa Monica that I was applying to, and they had me in for an interview, and they were looking for somebody to write Perl. And when you write a Perl script, you put this little thing at the top of the script that tells it the path of where to find the Perl interpreter, and then you can add command line flags on the end of it. And one of them was a -W, which kind of throws warnings as errors and so on. And so they were asking, as part of the technical part of the interview, when would you put -W next to the interpreter in your script? And I'm nervous and they're nervous. And so I kind of mentioned like, oh, well, when you want to break your script and not have it work anymore, because that is almost always what happens. If you find any Perl script and you just add -W on the interpreter, it's probably going to break, because instead of like just outputting warnings, it treats warnings as errors and it will crash your script. And so if you declare a variable and don't use it, or if you declare a variable and then try to reuse it later, it's considered like dirty in memory or tainted in memory. And it'll just start throwing all these errors and just crash your script and just not work anymore. And so when I mentioned in the interview, it's like, oh yeah, you add that if you don't want your script to work anymore. Like everybody started busting up laughing. And turns out I was interviewing with 2 of the 4 founders of the company, as well as their then VP of engineering. And they're like, all right, that was a good answer. That was pretty good. And like, several times during the interview, they're like, make the script stop working. That was good. That was a good answer on that one. And they brought that up a couple times. But there's no one magic answer like, why should we hire you? The key thing there, and I've talked about this on the stream, and if you read through my daily email series, this is the very first email that I send in that series, like, why should we hire you? It's like, tell me about yourself. They want to know why they should hire you, and you have to have a good answer prepared and practiced to explain why you're a good fit for that role, why you're headed in the same direction as the company, and why they should take a chance on you. You need to talk about the experiences that you bring and the background that you bring and the skills that you have and how that's going to benefit them and how you're going to make their life easier, you're going to make their job easier, you're going to make their team better by investing in you. So there's no like one phrase where I can say like, oh, just say Rumpelstiltskin and they'll like hire you instantly. There's no magic abracadabra phrase. You just have to be real. You have to be yourself. You have to be genuine, and you have to be able to explain the benefit to them of hiring you. That's really what that answer needs to be. There's like a what do they call it, like cost something benefit, or cost benefit ratio or something like that. There's a return on investment that they're expecting. When they hire you, they're expecting a return on that investment. And so you need to be able to practice and prepare telling them why that investment is going to be a good return for them. So there's no one phrase, but it is something that you need to convey and practice. Never walk into an interview think you're just going to wing it. That's never going to work out. And I think we heard that with Lee last week on the stream. He's like, you got to prepare. You have to be prepared when you walk into that interview. You can't just walk in and ad lib everything as you go. It's just not going to work out. Coding More mentioned in chat, I had recruiters contact me within 24 hours of putting my first dev gig on LinkedIn. It seems people are specifically looking for people with experience. Yeah. And I've had my share of recruiters reach out already. I've been at Stream for 2 months, and I've had a handful of people reach out. It's like, hey, I got this great opportunity that you'd be a perfect fit for. And they're like, you know what, if I was at this job for like 3 or 4 years and I was thinking about moving on, then yeah, it might be a good fit for me. But like, I just started this job. Like, why are you reaching out to somebody who just started a job? Like, you should be reaching out to people that just left a job, like, and don't have another current job. Like, reach out to those people. Like, those are the people that need a new job, not me. I just got a new job. I don't need another new one. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things that happen with recruiters and so on. But yeah, once you start getting that experience on LinkedIn, you're going to get flooded, and it will get to a point where you're going to get very frustrated and exasperated with how often those recruiters are going to reach out. Um, and that's why I wrote a whole like headhunter blog series on iandouglas.com about how much I hate third-party agency recruiters, because they will pester you. And I've actually known recruiters who will place somebody at a job and then call them up 5-6 months later and say, hey, I got an even better job over here. It's going to pay you this much more. There are people out there who are willing to job hop and just to sort of promote themselves, like through like new titles and get those raises. But keep in mind that those third-party agency recruiters, they're making like usually 15 to 18, sometimes 20, 25% of your annual salary is a kickback from the company. So I know a lot of tech companies that just won't work with those third-party recruiters because it's expensive. They've already got to pay you that amount of money, but now they got to turn around and pay this other recruiter like a bucket load of money. And so some recruiters are literally just shotgunning your resume out all over the place, hoping that they can get a catch and get you a couple of interviews, and then it's up to you, but they're making a much better return on that investment of time than if you were just applying for those jobs yourself. Spontaneous Silver says in chat, what would you recommend to somebody that has a gap on their resume? Let's say they went to college, did a coding boot camp, and then a 1-year gap after the boot camp as somebody hiring for an entry-level role. What's your opinion when you see something like that? As a person trying to get the job, what suggestions do you have? By the way, I followed you on Instagram for a while, and I love the photos that you were posting. And so I think having a gap year on your resume, it can be okay, especially during 2020. I think nobody's even going to blink at the fact that, most of 2020 was a wash for a lot of people. But seeing your Jeep adventures and so on Instagram was pretty great. I would say the best way to sort of spin that is just say, like, you know what, we were under quarantine. So I spent some time just working on myself, taking a rest after boot camp because, I know the boot camp that you went to was super intense. Needed to take some time off and wanted to recharge. The thing that you need to show is that in that year that your skills did not go stale, that you are still every bit as capable a developer as you were the day you graduated. And so, for example, if I were to go look up your GitHub history, is there a giant gap on your GitHub history? If there's a big giant gap on there, that's going to make it much harder for me to believe that you've kept your skills sharp. So if you've been working on little side projects, if you've been working on open source and things like that, where I can actually see, the work that you've done over the past year that you weren't employed, then I'm not going to care that you took that year off. But if you took that year off and you're like, yeah, I just decided to kick back and have these adventures and I got all these cool pictures on Instagram to show for it, they're like, yeah, but what about all this tech skill that you've got? Like, do you still remember all of that stuff? Or are you going to have to spend like several months ramping up? Like, is your onboarding going to be much slower because you've got to kind of get back into that groove? Or have you been keeping those skills sharp? So as somebody screening that resume, I'll give you like a couple of impressions because you asked several questions in there. If you have a gap on your resume, you could start by just saying like, yeah, 2020 happened. I finished up my boot camp and there were no jobs. And so I took some time off and, just wanted to spend some personal time. And, I worked on these projects, kept my skills sharp, but I was really just focusing on myself, learning about myself. Now it's 2021. I'm back in the game. Some may questions like, okay, well, a lot of companies were hiring like early in 2021. Like, why was it a full year? And so you just have to be prepared with an answer. It may not come up, but it may come up. And if it comes up, you have to have an answer for it. And I would say I wouldn't worry too much about what that answer entails, especially if it entails 2020 and just took some time off. You could say, you know what, 2020 happened and I wanted to spend time with family and just, really focus on spending that quality time, with friends or family or whoever, and just focusing on that. That would totally be an okay explanation. But as a technical manager, then reviewing your application, reviewing your resume, reviewing your GitHub and your LinkedIn and things like that, I would still want to see that you've been keeping your skills sharp. Because if you haven't, that's going to be a much harder sell to me that you still understand all those things. And so my recommendation to you is, like, if you haven't been doing that, get on it. If you have been doing it, great, then you're fine. Just keep applying for those jobs and keep that networking going. And if there are people that I can make introductions to, you know how to reach me on LinkedIn, or you can do a bang LinkedIn in chat, and that'll show you information about chat, about how to find me on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter and all those places. So you can just do a bang help in the Twitch chat, and it'll give you like a whole bunch of other like bang commands that you can do to find out all kinds of info there to get in touch with me. So the first one is, what would you recommend to someone that has a gap? That would be like, well, how are you going to explain that gap? That would be the first one there. What's your opinion when I see something like that? I mean, it would depend a little bit on like what was the reason for that. But I mean, I've seen people, like I've interviewed people in the past where I've seen gaps like that, and I don't ask them, you know. Sometimes it's none of my business. It might have been a health concern. It might have been, you know, like mental health concern or a physical health concern. Like, it's none of my business. I don't necessarily need to know. I just need to know, like, are you current with your skills? Do you have the skills I need for you to come do this job? And are you ready to get to work? Some people that have taken extended time off, they have a harder time kind of ramping up and getting back into employment because they're used to just kicking back and like, oh, you know, I'm going to sleep in till noon and, you know, watch a couple hours of Netflix and whatever. It's like, well, but how are you going to like get up at 7 a.m. tomorrow to start this job? Like, how are you going to like drastically adjust that schedule? And so I would say like your answer around that sort of thing could be like, you know what, I'm back in this, I'm back prepared, ready to work full-time in an office. But on the resumes that I've seen where I've seen gaps like that, I generally don't ask about it unless it's a pattern. If it's a pattern of gaps on the resume, I might ask a question. But from a non-HR point of view, I'm probably going to ask HR, like, hey, did you follow up with that person on like why they had that big gap in their resume? And if they haven't, now that I've asked them that question, they may do a follow-up call with you about that. And so either way, I think you should have something prepared. But as an engineering manager, when I would interview people, I would rarely ask about a gap on the resume. If the gap was like a month, 2 months, 3 months, I probably wouldn't even ask. I would sort of make a presumption that HR would have asked, like, why did you leave that last job? Why are you still unemployed? Like, did you leave a job and went unemployed and now you're applying for a new job? A lot of people will say like, well, you shouldn't quit a job before having another job lined up. But there are a lot of good reasons why you want to leave a job and just get out before finding a new job. Sometimes places are really toxic or the company goes under. Like, there are a lot of legitimate reasons why you would end your employment at a company before applying for a new job. But if you're in the tech industry and you've already got that first job, I highly recommend don't quit that job unless you have something else lined up. It's much easier. I do know a colleague who did that. He left his company because they was like really, really toxic. They were having a really bad time, so they quit. Well, the next thing they know, it had been over a year. And by that point they were applying for jobs and they weren't getting phone calls back. And so I met with him and he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, it's probably at a point now where you seem like you're unemployable. Like, you had this history of employment and then you left that job. Like, if it had only been a couple of months and you had applied right away, it might have been different. But because he waited quite an extended period of time before applying for new jobs, and again, this is my recollection of it, he went an extended period of time, that by the time he did start reaching out to people and trying to start that job hunt all over again, people were looking at his resume going, well, you've been unemployed on purpose for a long time, and we don't really see like skills being kept up and things like that. And so it actually made it much harder for him to get an interview. But he landed a job, and then he was fine after that. But it took a really long time for him to get that next job because it had been more than a year. So hopefully that'll give you like a handful of things there. As a person trying to get that job, I think I answered that. my opinion, as an engineering manager, I generally wouldn't ask about a gap. I would expect the HR team to do it. Their impressions of that would be a good question to pose if I get more HR people on the stream. And I've got a handful of other people lined up that want to be on the call who are on HR roles. I think that would be a good one to pose to them. So I will make a note of that after we wrap up here, so that I can specifically ask them that question, like, hey, if this scenario happened, what would you do as an HR person? Like, would you just pass on them and not call them at all? Or if they had the skill, would you still call them? And like, what kinds of questions would you ask? I think that would be a good thing to follow up on. So I'll try to follow up on that on the stream. So subscribe to the stream and find out when that goes live. And you actually got a job, so that's great. Looking at chat, we interviewed someone in that situation, but they had terrible answers as to why they had that gap. Yeah. So you have to have something prepared. You have to be able to have a good explanation for it. But again, a lot of times it's not their business. Like if you literally you got to a point in your life where you're just like super burned out and you just need to take time off, take care of you. This sounds so hypocritical coming out of my mouth because I'm the worst one at taking care of myself. I try to take care of everybody else around me. And then I end up with shoulder surgery or something drastic, in my own life. And so I'm realizing, especially this year, that I have to take care of myself. And so now I'm like even more adamant about like, take care of yourself. If you need to take that time off, take that time off. But in the past, like I was never the one to take that time off, but don't be like me. Take that time off. If you need to take that time off, you have to take care of yourself. All right, cool. I got these 3 questions left, and then we'll wrap up from there. So their question was, what is this interview question related? And they're quoting, describe a problem you've discovered in your job, like how you identified it and how you handled it. Is that question related to a mistake that I did in my work or to a problem related to the company operation? And so the question, they're asking a question about a question. They may have heard an interview question that says, describe a problem you discovered in your job, how you identified it and how you handled it. And then they're saying, based on that question, are they asking me to explain like a mistake that I made or just a problem in general relating to the company operation? I think it could go either way. And I think you could probably ask for some clarification on the question about whether it was a problem that you caused or just a problem that you discovered. In this case, the wording of the question is it was a problem that you discovered in your job, how you identified it and how you handled it. I think from a tech industry point of view, this could really give me information about like how you do debugging. Like when something goes wrong or if something broke, how do you determine what broke, why it broke, what was the root cause? How are you going to handle that? How did you fix it so it's not going to happen again? And like the first thing that comes to my mind, for example, would be like test-driven development. Like if you end up with a bug in your code, how did that make it through the testing? How did that make it through the QA process? How did that make it through user testing and actually get deployed to production? Was it just an edge case, like you were asking for an email address and somebody put in a poop emoji and you just never considered that was a possibility? And at the same time, when I taught at Turing, I would always tell students, like, don't try to write edge case tests for absolutely every scenario under the sun, or you will never stop writing tests and you'll never get around to actually writing the software. And so there is a practical limit of how much you can test for. And then once you do get a bug, then you go back and you write the test that covers that scenario, and then that'll never happen again. And so you could talk about that kind of scenario and just say, like, we did our due diligence. We tested what we thought we could or what we had time to before we deployed. And then this bug came up. And so we discovered why it happened in the code. We wrote some tests. We saw that break the tests. And so we went in, we patched the code, we fixed it, and it passed. And now we've never had that problem again. Or it could be like, yeah, I got woken up at like 2 a.m, somebody on call, or I was on call and something broke, a system went down, and I had to go try and diagnose what happened. So here's the process that I followed. Here's how I discovered what went wrong. This is how I figured out how to fix it, or how we as a team could sort of take care of it, and try to prioritize it. Like, is this an emergency? Like I need to call other people and wake them up in order to fix it? Or is this something I can fix myself Or is this just I need to reboot or restart an instance? Or is this like, oh, the whole business is coming to a screeching halt because this went down? So like how you diagnose that and how you think about that is actually very telling in the job. So having a good scenario around that makes for a very good story. But I think as an entry-level dev, you're probably not going to have many answers for a question like that. If you're an intermediate dev, you might have an answer for it. If you're a senior dev, you probably definitely have a scenario that you could recall about that sort of thing. But if you're early in your career, it's going to be much harder for you to come up with those kinds of answers. And as we talked about with Lee last week on the stream, it's okay not to have an answer. My job as an interviewer is to find out what you know and what you don't know, and what sorts of scenarios you've faced and which ones you haven't, and then figure out whether that fits in with what I'm looking for on the team. And so if you don't have an answer, that's okay. Just be upfront, be honest about it, and say, in a production sort of environment, I've never come across this so far. Or, you know what, I just got out of school and we never really had a scenario about this. So I'm a little bit curious what would go into that. I would hope that the company would have like a playbook or something like that to follow, where, we can work through like some sort of diagnostic process. If this broke, then it's maybe pointing to this, but if that works, but this part broke, then maybe it's pointing to that. A lot of companies will literally sit down and write out diagnostic playbooks for how things could potentially break and what to do in the scenario that those things break. And so if you don't have a good story to tell, then you can kind of turn that back on them. And hey, thanks for the follow, Van VIP. Appreciate it. You can certainly turn the question back on them and say, what kind of like playbooks or scenarios have you as a company had to deal with? Because I haven't had to do that myself. But like I say, as you kind of progress through your career, you're going to find those scenarios and you'll have stories to tell. 2 questions left. Why is the candidate's positioning a differential in a job interview? This one sounds like it came from like a non-North American person. If I were to rephrase this question, I might rephrase it like, how does like your previous role or previous title play into like getting a new job interview? Companies want to see that you are progressing in your skills. They want to see that you're progressing in what you know and what you can do. And so there are definite things that you can sort of explain during the process of interviewing with them, where you can talk about like, this was what my previous role was, this is what I want to be doing. And you can certainly share that aspect of where you want to take your career. Whether your previous title or previous role plays into the current role to which you're applying will depend on what that company is looking for. If they're looking for a senior level dev, they're going to hope that you have senior level experience. They're probably not going to promote an intermediate person into a senior level dev role. They're probably going to want to see that you've taken on some of the responsibilities of a senior dev so that they're more likely to hire you for that senior level dev role. It's hard to get a promotion with a job. It's not impossible, but as an engineering manager, I want to have sort of the trust that you've done this kind of work before. And so knowing what responsibilities you've had and what sort of progression you've had in your career up until this point, I think can be really important. So I think being able to describe the kinds of roles and the kinds of responsibilities that you've had and how that's going to play into this new role that they're trying to hire you for is going to be like kind of the big takeaway on this question. And so your previous title is going to give them an idea of, or previous title or previous level, previous role, that sort of thing. It's going to give them some indication of what kinds of skills and what level of progression you've had at that previous job, and whether you're ready to take on the responsibilities of the job that they have, that they want you to do. And so those would all be sort of key things to take into consideration there. The last question that I had came in over Twitter, and somebody specifically reached out and said, hey, could I do a system design interview with you? And I know I've got some old pages on my iandouglas.com website that say that I do active coaching. I do all of my active coaching through interviewing.io. And so I'm going to reach out to this person and tell them directly over Twitter. If you want to do a mock interview with me, you can sign up at interviewing.io. It is a paid platform, though. It won't be free. But if you're in a position where it's a financial hardship, you can talk to them about deferring the cost of the interviews. But that's where I'm doing all of my online coaching right now is through interviewing.io. And I just signed up to do a 5-session sort of deal with them. So if you're a junior or intermediate level developer and you're looking to do like multiple sessions on interviewing.io, you can book me for those as well. So you can just reach out to them and say, hey, I want to do this 3-session or 5-session thing, and I want to specifically work with Ian Douglas. Then they'll contact me and they'll get that sort of worked out. And so if you want that, I'm only doing that through interviewing.io, partly for like the accounting business kind of perspective, because I'm technically a freelance sort of interviewer on their platform. I don't want to have like multiple streams of income and like declare all these things on my taxes. I just want to put everything under one roof in that regard. So if you do want to book my time and you do want to do mock interviews and stuff with me, it will be through interviewing.io right now. I'm not doing them privately otherwise. Cool. That's pretty much all I had for the stream tonight. We're a little over an hour. Appreciate everybody dropping by, Coding More and Spontaneous Silver. Appreciate you dropping some stuff in chat and saying hi. Hope you're doing well. Good luck with those jobs. Silver, definitely want to find out what you've been up to lately, aside from Jeep adventures. But yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. Let me know what's going on with you. To everybody else watching, appreciate you kind of sticking around. And again, let me know on YouTube, let me know on LinkedIn and so on when I post these videos. Would you like to see me sort of chop this kind of video into those individual questions, or would you be willing to sit through like an hour-long sort of Q&A kind of thing where I'm like addressing lots of different questions? Part of me is leaning towards like splitting it up, but that's also a lot more work on my part as well. But you know, if that's what people would find helpful, then I'm willing to do that. Hey, thanks for the follow, Sir Dies a Lot. That's a great name. Cool. Yeah, I appreciate the follow on that. So that's pretty much all I got for tonight. Don't really have anybody to raid, but it is Sunday night, which means Bob Ross's channel is still streaming Bob Ross videos. They actually do like full weekend things. They start streaming his old painting archives on Fridays, and they go all weekend long. So definitely check out @Bob Ross on Twitch. Aside from that, I'll get this up on YouTube a little bit later, and then feel free to post on there when I post on LinkedIn and Twitter. Let me know if you want me to split this into smaller videos, because I'm willing to do like shorts, as they call them on YouTube. But I'm a little bit curious what the masses want, if that would be helpful. And I also put out a poll that I need to go back and kind of double check, but I'm also debating whether an audio stream of this would help as like a podcast. I did have a couple people respond, say like, yeah, I would listen to a podcast over like having time to like watch a video, especially if it's something like this Q&A session where it's just me and my smiling face and like maybe a 3D printer or something in the background. Like there's nothing really to watch in this scenario other than the chat going by. But I'm debating as well, like just sort of stripping out the audio from this and like posting the audio on like Spotify or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, I'm going to kind of leave that up to folks to tell me what they would prefer. But aside from that, I'll let everybody take off. Have a great week. If you are applying for a job, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let me do a LinkedIn thing here, and it is bang LinkedIn. And so you can find me on linkedin.com/in/Ian Douglas 736, same as my Twitch username. You can find me there. Feel free to connect with me. If I can make an introduction for you to anybody else for a job that you're applying to, please reach out. I'm happy to do that within reason. You know, I don't want to like introduce you to like 50 people or have everybody introduce everybody else to 50 people. But yeah, and for Sir Dies a Lot, I stream every Sunday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, which would be 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. I have been thinking a little bit about maybe streaming earlier on Sundays. But I kind of like the 7 p.m. time slot. It works well for my schedule. But as far as like day of the week and so on, I'm probably going to stick with that. Thursday stream is, I'm going to start getting back into that regular cadence of having like 1 or 2 guests on the stream, just this stream is never about like, oh, this is what Ian says. Like, this is certainly my perspectives, but I want to have people on the stream to have like a bunch of perspectives. It's not just helpful to hear advice from one person. We need to hear perspectives from lots of people if we're gonna like really understand what's going on out there. So check me out Sunday nights, Thursday nights, and you can also check out YouTube as well. YouTube.com/C/Ian Douglas, the letter C/Ian Douglas. And you can kind of see the whole backlog of my videos there. Cool, you got a second interview coming up. That's awesome. Reach out to me on LinkedIn for sure, and let me know if I can help you out on that. Happy to help out there. Cool. Have a good night, everybody. And yeah, I'm definitely taking care of the shoulder. I love I got one of these wraps that kind of go on there, and then it circulates ice water through it. It feels so good. I'm gonna go put that on for a couple more hours before I go to bed. It feels really great. It keeps the swelling down, stuff like that. Most of the swelling's done. Hopefully gonna be out of this sling in another week and a half. And physical therapy is kicking my butt right now, so it's all good. But gradually making progress with it, and having a good time getting through it. Looking forward to being more productive, especially this week. But yeah, if I can help out with your job hunt in any way or other interview prep questions, you can send them in to me, ian.douglas@techinterview.guide, or you can reach out on LinkedIn, Quora, Twitter. I'm on a lot of different platforms for Q&A kind of stuff. So yeah, reach out, ask me as many questions as you like. I'll probably do more little Q&A bits from time to time. Aside from that, stay safe, stay healthy, drink something tasty, stay hydrated, and we'll see you on Thursday night. Have a good night, everyone.